Hello, everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about the dynamics of helping. All right. So we're going to look at some of the research conducted by Latney and Darley. All right. So let's jump right into it. So, going to share my screen. Boom. All right. So, when we help, the first thing we have to do is identify that a situation in which help might be needed is occurring. All right, and so this is the first step in Latney and Darley's series of steps that are required to help. Now, as we go along, again, we're starting here at step one, but as we go along, we'll talk about what could interfere with the decision to help at each step. All right, so starting off right here with this first step of identifying that a situation identifying that a situation might involve help, things that could prevent us from noticing something could prevent us from noticing the event in which help is necessary. So, for example, when we're in a hurry, we don't notice things as well. All right. When we're distracted, we don't notice things as well. This is part of the reason why people are told not to text and drive. All right. So, Latney and Darley, specifically Darley and another colleague named Batson, did a study that really demonstrates this particular obstacle to helping. Specifically, what they did is they had participants fill out questionnaires in one building, and then were asked to go to another building to give a certain speech. Now, they were told that they would be giving a speech either over what they think seminary students about seminaries students' career decisions, or they were asked to give a speech about the Good Samaritan parable. Ultimately, which message they were asked to give a speech about was irrelevant. But what was relevant, what they did find effective, whether or not people helped, was how much in a hurry they were in. So some participants were told, first, all participants were given instructions about how to get from where they were to the room where they would need to go to give the speech. But some participants were told, oh, you're late, you better go now. So that's the high hurry condition. Some participants were told, some participants were told they were on time, and so they should head on over there now. Other participants were told that they had a few minutes so they could make their way on over. So that's the low hurry condition. Regardless of which of those conditions they were in, though, they passed, because if they went the way that they were instructed to go, all right, they passed someone who was working for the experimenter. We call, again, to remind you, those people who are working for the experimenter, we call them a confederate, or we call them a stooge, all right? They passed by a confederate posing as someone who needed help, all right? Specifically, they were bent over in a doorway, coughing and groaning, all right? Now, one of the main things that they were looking at is whether or not participants stopped to help. And what they found is that participants were far more likely to help when they were not in a hurry. Participants who were in a hurry barely ever stopped, all right? And so here we see a demonstration of this principle where if we are too distracted, we're in a hurry, just like in the Good Samaritan story, right? When people are in a hurry to be somewhere, they may not even notice that a situation exists in which help might be needed. But let's say that we identify, hey, there's something going on here and somebody might need help. We then have to make sure that we're interpreting the situation as help is actually needed. All right, a lot of events could occur that are surprising, but not always is help needed. And so we have to interpret the situation as one in which help is actually needed. All right, is this a flash mob at a mall, or is this an actual event in which I might need to help somebody? All right, well, hopefully everybody knows what a flash mob is. Usually theater people coming out from multiple places, usually doing some kind of performance, but it can certainly seem, well, certainly it seems like something's going awry, but no help is needed. All right, so then we get to the second step of people need to identify that help is indeed needed. All right. Well, if you recall from our earlier discussions of conformity, you'll recall that there are certain situations in which we look to others for guidance in what to think, in what attitudes to form. Well, specifically in ambiguous situations where it's not really clear whether help is needed, and a lot of emergencies where help is needed are ambiguous. Right? You're getting conflicting signals from a bunch of different places. Well, if you remember back in our discussion of social influence, that when what to do is ambiguous, but doing the right thing is important, such as in an emergency, people will often look to others around them. And if you recall that when they look to others around them, they then conform to that behavior, and often they will engage in a type of conformity known as private acceptance. Specifically, they will come to believe that what other people are doing, what they believe is leading other people to do what they're doing, is indeed the right belief to have. They'll privately accept the attitudes of other people around them. Now, if everybody in the situation is doing this same thing and nobody's helping, it can create a situation whereby everybody assumes that everybody else knows that no real help is needed. All right, creating a situation known as plural ignorance. Everybody's assuming everybody else knows something that indeed no one knows. All right, so that pluralistic ignorance can then keep anybody in that group from actually helping. All right, but let's assume that doesn't happen. Let's assume that we've noticed that an emergency is occurring, that a critical event is occurring, and we've established that help is actually needed. Well, now we're to the third step, in which the person has to assume responsibility for helping. But here again, we have some potential pitfalls. Specifically, if there are other people around us, then the chances of us assuming responsibility ourselves goes down. All right. So the bystander effect refers to the fact that, or to the effect wherein people are less likely to render aid or help when they're in the presence of others. And that's partially due to the fact that when they're in the presence of others, they feel less responsible. All right. They feel less individually responsible for giving help. That phenomenon, the phenomenon whereby they feel less responsible, is known as the diffusion of responsibility. Latney and Darley examined this in a study in which they had participants either come into a classroom by themselves or with two Confederates who were told to do nothing the entire study other than, act like. Specifically, they were told to act like participants but do nothing with regards to the critical event, which I'll describe in a little bit. Or they had three genuine participants all come in, but none of them were told that a critical event might be occurring. Well, either alone, with two Confederates, or with two other actual participants, participants then started completing a series of questionnaires. Well, after so long of working on those questionnaires, the experimenter started releasing smoke into the room. And they continued to let smoke flow into the room until the whole room was smoky. And they either ended the study when participants never came to report that there was smoke in the room, or after one or some of the participants went to alert the researcher that, hey, there's smoke in the room, they then sent them on to the next part of the studies and told them, we'll handle it. And then they were told in the debriefing. Now, what they found is that when they were alone, participants helped. But when they were in the room with two other people who did nothing, so there's three people in the room, two of which are Confederates, who were told to not respond to the smoke at all, when that happened, participants barely ever reported. I believe it was as low as like 12% of the time were participants likely to report the smoke to the researcher when the two other people in the room were Confederates told not to respond to the smoke. All right. In the scenario where there were 3 people in the room, but the 2 other people were actually real participants who didn't know that smoke was going to be flooded into the room. In that situation, helping went up a little bit. It went up to about 30 some odd %. But still, when other people were around, participants were less likely to help. All right, they were less likely to alert somebody to the situation. And what we can expect from social impact theory is that as the number of people in an emergency or critical situation grow, helping from any one individual would drop. All right, why? Well, social impact theory tells us that as the size of the group around us gets bigger, that group affects us more. All right, so as the number of people around us grow, we would expect the bystander effect and greater diffusion to occur more frequently, to be more likely to occur, and would expect greater diffusion of responsibility. Each individual would feel less responsible for helping. All right, but now let's say that we've seen the situation, we've established that, hey, help is needed, and we've assumed responsibility. But what if we don't know the necessary skills to help? Well, helping drops. All right. If a person's choking, but you don't know the high maneuver, if somebody's in a burning building, but you don't know that building at all, right? You don't know how to get around. So if you tried to help, you'd get in there and you'd probably kill yourself. All right. If you don't have the skills or expertise, right, to help, then chances of helping drop. I include the "not that kind of doctor" quotation in there simply because for people who watch this video, like you social psychologist folks, or anybody else who watches it on my YouTube channel, oftentimes if you go on and get your PhD in like experimental psychology, like I have, you may frequently get the question or frequently get questions about mental health. But I'm not trained in mental health, and if you get your PhD in experimental psychology, you primarily wouldn't be trained in mental health either, and so you wouldn't have the expertise to help with those kinds of conditions and issues, and so you're not that kind of doctor. You don't have the expertise, the ability to effectively help. But let's say you notice that there's a situation, a critical event happening, an emergency. You notice, or you interpret it as one in which help is needed. You assume responsibility and you're capable of helping. Now, what determines whether or not you actually decide to help? Well, that is the product of a cost-benefit analysis that you then make. Does the cost, the potential cost of helping, is it low enough relative to the benefit to justify my going? Is it going to be too costly? There's not going to be enough benefit? So, for example, the situation of going into a burning building. Is the fire so big and the damage so far that maybe even you might be told that there are people in the building, but you don't hear anything. You don't hear any screams. So at this point, they may already be dead, and the house is so engulfed that if you went in, you would probably be killed. So now the cost is so high that the benefits of pulling out dead bodies might be not a high enough benefit to warrant your decision to help. All right. Now, having said that, I feel like a heel, because it feels like a cold, calculating decision. But these decisions are largely made automatically. All right. Now, some things other than danger can increase the cost, like we see with the phenomena of audience inhibition. With audience inhibition, specifically what's happening is that people feel reluctant. People are inhibited from helping because they're concerned with other people evaluating them negatively for helping. They don't want to look like an idiot for helping. And so those reputational concerns, those impression concerns, those impression management concerns can raise the cost. And by raising the cost of helping, they can reduce the chances that the person will decide to help. All right, but provided the cost-benefit ratio is acceptable. right? The cost doesn't, the benefits don't necessarily need to exceed the costs. Certainly that's helpful, but they don't necessarily need to. All right, there are appreciable or not appreciable, but acceptable levels of loss for a certain benefit. All right, but if the cost-benefit ratio is acceptable, all right, then people are more likely to help. So, what does it take to help? It takes noticing a critical event or an emergency in which help might be needed, interpreting that situation as one in which help is actually needed, assuming responsibility for helping, having the ability or expertise to help, and then deciding that the benefit of helping outweighs the cost. And that's that. All right, guys, that's it for this video. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them my way. But if not, have a great one, and I'll see you next time.